Transport is a weapon of war. This is clearly borne out by the following pictures, which reveal glimpses of the many and complex tasks to which the Southern Railway set its hand from the outset of the war. These BEF troops leaving Waterloo Station for France are a few of the thousands who were transported. Up to 7,000 troops, complete with baggage and equipment, traveled daily and continuously by Southern Railway. At Southampton Docks alone, during 1 month, 261 special trains arrived carrying troops for embarkation, a total of 100,000 men with their baggage and equipment. The Southern Railway, as the Secretary Company, had to compile the schedules covering the movements of all personnel and stores, irrespective of the particular railway company involved. And fighting equipment went too. Sheds at Southampton Docks were turned over for the storage of all sorts of war materials for shipment overseas. Within 6 hours of our declaration of war, Canada too declared war on Germany, and soon Canadians were arriving over here. Reinforcements from various parts of the empire were constantly coming in. Recognition of victories, such as the successful action of Ajax and Exeter against the Graf Spee, also had a place in our war effort, and here are some of them on their way to receive the thanks of the City of London. The grim days of Dunkirk faced the Southern Railway with new tasks. Its vessels brought thousands from the beaches of France. Many thousands of troops and much equipment had to be moved at short notice, and all instructions had to be conveyed by telephone. For security reasons, no schedules or notices could be issued to the staff. $320,000 men, occupying 620 trains, were carried during the peak fortnight of withdrawal across the Channel, as many as 7 southeast coast ports becoming starting points. French fighting men, too, mingled with the BEF. From the small French seaside resort of Saint-Valery, refugees from France, men of the BEF and French sailors were evacuated and arrived at Southampton, whence they were transported in special trains. Evacuation from Saint-Valery was difficult, however, owing to sea fog. Nevertheless, 36 special trains were run from Southampton to transport those who were lucky enough to get away. And now, Britain was on the defensive. Invasion seemed imminent. After experiment, means were devised of making it difficult for the enemy to use the railways should they invade. Altogether, 283 rail barriers or blocks were constructed on the southern system. The functions of railroads, trains, docks and vessels are obvious in wartime. In addition, however, there were the railway company's locomotive and carriage works. Here, at Ashford, wagons and trucks were made to the accompaniment of air raid warnings. Each worker, man, woman or boy, averaged 67 hours per week. Each wagon contains 1,792 parts, every one of which was numbered to correspond with its photograph already forwarded to its destination. Something like 20 wagons a day were turned out, and a total of 1,600 for overseas use were completed in record time. Here is a trainload of them off to Russia to be assembled at their destination point. At Southampton docks, the Southern was busy unloading lease-lend supplies from America, supplies which were adding to our own ever-increasing production. Lease-lend included timber, metals, foodstuffs and wood pulp, as well as army equipment. Up to D-Day, getting on for 1.5 million tons of lease-lend supplies were handled by the Southern at Southampton. More secure in our defence, war material for the offensive one day to be launched was mounting. At the Eastleigh Works of the Southern Railway, as also at Ashford, Brighton and Lancing, production had been switched to war needs. Pontoons, bridges, fast motorboats, harbour launches and assault landing craft were among the manufactures. This looks a simple business, but in fact, mathematically accurate measurements had to be made before the vessel could be lifted onto the wagon and then moved slowly out of the shop. This variety of work was done in addition to the building and maintenance of locomotives and rolling stock. This shop, formerly used for building carriages, was laid out for the construction of glider tail units, and large numbers of women were employed on this intricate work. In this locomotive building shop too, space was found for the production of anti-tank guns. To facilitate the loading and unloading of tanks, the railway company had to manufacture these special wagons. Ever-increasing numbers of bigger and better tanks, reflecting Britain's growing might, had to be delivered to the ports. One particular station handled as many as 600 tanks per month for a period of 6 months. All types of tanks, both British and American, were transported. This bridge-carrying tank is too high for transporting by rail, so it unloads its bridge onto another wagon. The introduction of the Churchill tank, with its increased width and weight, required most careful loading. Here is one of the several big gun exercises performed on the Southern Railway system. This gun was taken all the way from southeast England to the Dartmoor district in Devon to be tested. Just before, during and after D-Day, pressure on the Southern was at its greatest. In the peak month of July, Southampton docks handled 300,000 tons of traffic, more than 2.5 times that of a record peacetime month. At New Haven also, large quantities of stores and ammunition were dealt with. From D-Day, traffic was at its peak. During 1944, 5.5 million service personnel were carried on duty journeys, that is, other than leave journeys, by the Southern Railway. 26,000 special trains were run for this purpose. Ships berthed at the docks were railway owned, and a never-ending stream of troops was carried across the channel. You will hardly recognize the Biarritz, a former cross-channel steamer, in her war paint. The Isle of Guernsey, too, well known to travellers to the Channel Islands. American troops, too, were transported in the same way. Meantime, the steady flow of materials and equipment to Southampton docks for the second front continued. In 17 weeks, the Southern Railway employees, under great strain, accomplished the work which would normally have taken a year. Several Southern Railway cross-channel steamers were converted to hospital carriers, and here at Southampton, wounded are being carefully transferred from ship to train. To former travellers by ferry service between Dover and Dunkirk, this Southern Railway train ferry vessel will not be easily recognised. It now has a derrick weighing 258 tons, which projects 35 feet beyond the stern for lifting heavy locomotives. A specially constructed link span joined the ship to the land. This ferry service was inaugurated soon after D-Day and kept going regularly, discharging its precious cargo on the other side of the channel. Ambulance trains were a regular feature of the ferry service. The destination, is Cherbourg. As the war progressed and other ports became available, the ferry service was transferred to Dover for the shipment of locomotives to Calais. A load of 8 large locomotives with tenders and 20 trucks, the full load of each vessel per trip, was a useful contribution. Representatives of the War Office attended this little ceremony when the number of locomotives transported to Europe reached 1,000. Although the railway company carried several million troops, the crossing to France of the millionth American soldier was something of a landmark. The Mayor of Southampton wishes him good luck and Godspeed. Ceaselessly, by night and day, the huge transport machine of the Southern Railway performed its task. Vast quantities of war material were moved, and millions of men and women of the fighting services were carried to their allotted destinations. All this in addition to the normal civilian demands. The Southern Railway is proud of its men and women whose loyalty and devotion to duty contributed so much to final victory. For more than 100 years, the Great Western Railway has maintained an unbroken record of uninterrupted service in carrying the nation's goods and people on their lawful occasions. It has grown into a vast undertaking, employing thousands of people, 95% of whom were men employed in a veritable legion of capacities. The driver, the guard, the ticket collector, the porter, the booking clerk, the signalman, the carter, and the permanent way worker, they are the familiar types known to all. But there are hundreds of other types who make up the background of this huge undertaking. The engine builders, the shed workers, the cleaners, the maintenance staffs, the storesmen. They are only a few of those thousands who do not meet the public eye, but whose work is just as necessary to maintain this great national service. How many realize that to transport one load or to carry one person, all these thousands of workers are engaged, each in his allotted task, to make a comprehensive whole? On September the 3rd, 1939, war came. Total war, such as the world has never known. It called for manpower from every sphere of life, and the railways were not behind the best in giving their full quota. Railway service is as vital in war as in peace, in fact, to a far greater degree, and its service must be fully maintained at all costs. Thus opens the proudest moments in the history of our womenfolk. During the last war, they showed us the mettle of their pasture. In this, they are giving in full that measure and efficiency. Women flocked to the various railway employment offices, where they were carefully selected according to their capacity and rapidly passed into the company's service. Wives took their husbands' place. Sweethearts worked and waited, from armchair to auto truck, from babies to barrows, from crochet to crossing keeping, from dusters to driving. Throughout the whole of the company's system, they came and carried on the good work. Naturally, one of the first grades to be affected was our old friend and advisor, the porter, whose varied duties were quickly learned by the women. For late travelers especially, how welcome is a little help at the end of a long journey. With the males too, she is on the spot, doing a grand job of work and doing it well. The carriage cleaner soon got busy, and there's not much you can tell a woman about cleaning. Also the new ticket collector, who can be so inquisitive, but who is always helpful. In addition to handling people and parcels, women can also handle horses, and although the horse is said to be the friend of man, it soon learned how to extend its affections. Motors also are willing workers in the hands of women, as witness the fact that our goods are carried and delivered just as efficiently. Drivers can work with the assurance that their vans are carefully serviced, which all motorists appreciate. parcels porter, too, has learned the art of packing things just where they're wanted, ready to hand. A very important factor in saving both time and labor, not to mention claims. War grew more intense. More men were needed. And women were required in greater numbers, extending to the more technical branches, and the employment offices were constantly busy in selecting suitable applicants. Special training was necessary in some of the more technical departments to ensure efficiency and safety, and the company meanwhile had established schools where women were trained in the more intricate duties, as for instance in the signal school. The instruments known as the block telegraph, which record the state of the line, are studied with especial care. In the Guards School, not only is junction working explained, but general working is taught in a practical way. Some of the old stalwarts and experts taught the women the various jobs they were to take over. Practical training was an essential factor and was freely given, both in the great workshops and on the line. Woman rose nobly to the occasion. She soon appeared as passenger train guard with its many familiar and equally numerous and unnoticed duties. A passenger guard has quite a lot to think about besides answering questions. The goods guard, like her sister the passenger guard, has a very responsible job of work. She has to be both shunter and loader in some of the outlying districts, in addition to getting her train away to time. But she does it. Even in that holy of holies, the signal box, woman's keen mind and firm hand guide and hand the trains. Away from the public eye, hundreds of women regularly clock on and get ready for the day or night's work. In the engine sheds, in the docks, in the goods sheds and the various workshops, where the great task of maintaining the railway goes on unceasingly night and day. A great deal of time can be saved by correct loading. Those who've kept a home in order quickly saw the necessity of getting things in their right place. Minutes, even seconds lost in loading rapidly multiply and affect the whole system, but the trains still run to schedule. It requires a sharp eye and an alert brain to be a number taker. Her job is to see that all wagons are properly labelled and to record all wagons as they leave. Much depends on this necessary work. An oiler or a greaser or an engine shed labourer has not got exactly a drawing room job. But who cares for a little honest dirt? Likewise, these engine cleaners find their children get very dirty when they go out for a run. On the track itself, constant care and attention is required to keep it in good running condition. Lines have to be kept levelled up where slight settlements take place. Nuts and bolts must always be tight. And weeding the track is one of those never-ending tasks. Another innovation on the railway is the making of reinforced block sleepers. The reinforcement is made by bending metal rods and assembling them into frames. The moulds are then partially filled with cement. The reinforcement is inserted at the correct level and the filling is completed. After about 24 hours, the sleepers are turned out and allowed to harden off. Great numbers are required, and this shop alone turns out about 3,400 sleepers a week. Many other concrete articles are also made for the railway, such as large 6-ton slabs, which the women face off with the skill of a plasterer. About 2,000 tons of reinforced concrete articles are turned out each month. Wooden sleepers are of course still used, and here again women assist in fitting the chairs that carry the rails. Being a crane driver is different. There's something exciting in lifting heavy loads, swinging them round and dropping them with precision on an exact spot. One feels like something between a chauffeur and a ship's captain on this particular job. At the same time, it's exacting work, even in some of the smaller docks and waterways, and the company has many docks, both large and small. You don't feel exactly like a ship's captain as a dock porter. Still, there's the call of the sea, and likewise the foreman, which all goes to make life worth living, and speedy dock work has been invaluable to the war effort. It is not only the wise virgins of old who kept their lamps trimmed. Lamps of all kinds are used on the railway, especially the signal lamps whose functions are so vitally important. It's no easy task removing used and fixing clean lamps in their allotted places. Here again, women assist the linemen, both in tending the various signal appliances on the track itself, the fixing of detonators in the detonator placing machines, and also in taking care of the intricate mechanism of these guardians of our safety, such as repairing telephone equipment. Winding coils for use in intricate electrical apparatus for railway signaling, including automatic train control. Routine inspection and adjustment of telephone switchgear. Testing and topping up of batteries, energizing phone exchange, etc. Still the calls on the railway increased. More men were required, more goods to be carried, more movements of troops and people. And still the railway responded adequately to all demands. In more of the great workshops, she appeared. polishing the coaches, stacking timber in the road wagon repair shop, helping the boilermaker with his tricky little red-hot rivets, likewise the wagon frame riveter, working the pneumatic driller, painting in the road vehicle repair shop, a most important job in wartime when new vehicles of all kinds are hard to come by. If ever women kept the home fires burning, she certainly did on the railway. She tended the furnaces, and in the forge guided the great hammers to beat the reluctant metal into shape. In almost every department of railway work came the firm, fair hands of woman. In nearly 100 grades she worked. The welcome voice of the train announcer is now familiar to all travellers.
4:45 for the Worcester Line, Malvern and Hereford will leave an extra in at platform 3. 4:45 calling at Oxford, Moreton-in-Marsh, Evesham, Pershore.
The new booking clerk is equally smart and efficient. Even in the days of alarm clocks and radio, the caller-up is still necessary. But this is mostly for calling men at short notice, such as happens to drivers and firemen. Painters are scarce, and bridges especially must be maintained, so the women were not slow in going over the top. The weighbridge attendant soon learned her rather tricky job. While in the works, the auto truck driver is simply invaluable. The policewoman controls the traffic with a customary smile. And if you want to know the time, or any other information for that matter, well, ask the policewoman. And you can trust the dock policewoman not to let a jeep get by. Unloading goods from barges into railway trucks is a fairly heavy job and is generally done as an assistant to men. Whitewashing is an applied art, but not so difficult when applied to platform edging. Stores of almost every conceivable kind are needed on the railway and must be ready at hand whenever required. Good storekeeping saves much valuable time in every department, and in many places women are efficiently carrying on in this important work. It's amazing how women can handle the massive bogies. They'll take a bogie to bits with the same ease as undressing a baby. A cloakroom attendant has to do some quick thinking and fast moving to please the public, and our women folk can do both. Wartime restrictions on restaurant cars have added enormously to the work of the refreshment and dining rooms. Refreshment rooms, etc., are spread all over the line and have to be regularly supplied with food and drink, especially buns. Some of the women porters who served this department in the last war came back to their old jobs and carried on merrily. Passengers usually get refreshment at the start of their journey, and Paddington Refreshment Room is generally a busy scene at any time of the day. After the long journey from London to Exeter, when there is a short stop, passengers crowd into the refreshment room and the staff have a few hectic minutes. This great change in personnel brought with it the responsibility for the welfare of the women. Canteens were provided where food could be had in comfort. Restrooms were fitted for the convenience of women during the day. First aid posts were set up under the care of trained assistants. Throughout it all, the human touch was not forgotten, and many and various were the domestic problems the forewoman helped to settle. Nor shall we forget that brave band of real frontline workers, the telephone inquiry girls, whose constant contact with the public remains unbroken during all conditions. The women who answer your calls whenever they are made. Even during the many alerts, they are at their desks, or under them when things get very threatening, but your call comes through.
Yes, we will do our best. 8:55 a.m. and that's better. 10:30 a.m. on Sundays, changing at Bristol, to Wells at 3:10 p.m. Thank you.
And so the great national work of the railway goes on, in fair weather or foul. It carries the men of war, it carries the sinews of war, it carries the nation's goods and people. When history is written, the loyal spirit and devotion to duty of the women of the Great Western Railway will find its true place. They nobly responded to the call of the country and did their full share, as we knew they would, in helping towards final victory. A state of war exists between us. The fateful words uttered on that September morning in 1939 rang up the curtain on a worldwide holocaust. These pictures set the scene of the story which can now be told. The story of the achievements of the Southern Railway workshops and the men and women who toiled in them during those weary years of conflict. These were the early days of the Britain Can Take It period, when the gallant first of the few heroically tackled a numerically superior Luftwaffe, and boffins in their schools for secrets strove to devise a weapon for its defeat. Britain could take it, but taking all that Jerry liked to give was not in keeping with the Southern's traditions. Our works people quickly shed their fatalism and began to do things. Some of their early operations were performed on passenger coaches which were completely stripped and refitted for the Red Cross service. Other companies' coaches, as well as our own, were converted in the Eastleigh shops for hospital work. The first 4 were actually ready only 12 days after the outbreak of war. A few months later, they were in constant use. The undertones of war in Europe were soon amplified to full blast for the whole world to hear. During those desperate days, with the threat of invasion so imminent, any weapon which could be used effectively was brought out from its own particular limbo and pressed into service. Although the work was utterly strange to them, the men on the benches in the Southern Railway shops took the switch over from the maintenance of locos to the reconditioning of old howitzers in their stride. Later, the highly skilled business of making barrels for a famous anti-tank gun, the 2-pounder, was effected in our shops to government specification. All the processes involved in the manufacture of these barrels were carried out by the Southern's workers. The forgings were bored and cut and drilled and planed and milled and finally finished with all that expert craftsmanship which is still a joy of those who believe that to buy British is to buy the best. And this right in the middle of the biggest crisis which we as a nation have ever faced. The men and women of the Southern really were delivering the goods. Goods needed urgently for the war fronts as well as for the home front. Nuisance raids seemed to affect production but little. Work went on energetically as the Southern Railway helped Britain to build up that striking force so necessary for her salvation. Another peep behind the scenes at the Eastleigh shops, where they made the very hush-hush 2-inch rocket guns, which were mounted on our merchant ships to repel unwelcome attentions from enemy dive bombers. A heavily armored pillar box was the main feature of the guns, In this sat the operator who, from behind his metal screen, fired off the rockets, several at a time. Racks fixed to the side of the pillar boxes held the rockets. All the tests and sighting necessary to ensure that these rocket guns were an effective weapon were carried out in our own shops during the course of manufacture. Once all the sights and racks had been lined up, the guns were given routine checks before being handed over to the government. Few people saw these rocket guns in action, but it can easily be imagined that all out they made things very unpleasant for visitors from the Luftwaffe. During the daylight nuisance raid period, the workshop sirens voiced only warnings of real and immediate danger. And from among the Southern's men who were working with such exemplary application at their war tasks came the Southern Railway Home Guard, trained by professional instructors to a high degree of military proficiency. They performed most of the duties done by Army personnel, including the manning of their own shop's anti-aircraft guns, the renowned Bofors. And there was nothing wrong with their gun drill. Incidentally, these pictures are of the Lancing Works team. At this time, Ack-Ack was of prime importance as a strong deterrent to enemy raiders. Later on, it was found to be a valuable antidote to the serious menace of the flying bomb. By this time, the Red Star of the Soviet people had firmly fixed itself in the minds of the British as an emblem of immeasurable courage and tenacity. Aid to Russia. Banners, headlines, public speakers and government announcements, all of them proclaimed the pressing need for assistance to our great ally. Russia needed supplies. She needed them urgently. Her one lifeline, still uncut by the Nazi, was that long, arduous, but incredibly romantic one stretching from the Persian Gulf to the Caucasus. Again, in response to the government's call, the Southern's workers at the Ashford shops set to with a will to make 1,000 goods wagons for the Soviet railways. This was aid to Russia indeed. All the wagon parts were standardized and numbered to correspond with the numbers marked on photographs already in Russian hands, so that on arrival at their destination, they could be assembled without difficulty. Our machines bit off and spewed out lengths of angle iron, correct in measurement to the nearest decimal point. More machines sawed and planed and drilled, expertly guided by the Southern's workpeople. Never did work go on with a more singing rhythm. It was now that the slogan, "Britain can make it," was born and proved beyond all possible doubt. Everyone, man, woman and boy, put in as many as 67 hours a week in the great rush to make the 1,792 parts required for every one of the 1,000 wagons ordered for the Soviet. Meanwhile, British troops had already taken that long voyage out east, via the Cape and Aden, to the Persian Gulf, to Basra, to Persia and Iraq. The supply route to the Caucasus was lined with them. Britain was taking no chances of munitions going astray. And the supplies came unfailingly. If ever pride of achievement can be justified, this feat of the Southern's work people was justification enough. There they are, a trainload of wagons made at the rate of 20 a day, off to Russia. First stop, Basra. A favorite command of our forces NCO was, "Get mobile," an order taken literally by the Ashford shops when they created a number of mobile workshops for services use. These were fitted with everything necessary to make them most useful additions to Army equipment. Another effective transport weapon made in the Southern's Ashford shops, the tank ramp wagon. One of these ramp wagons placed in front of a whole trainload of tanks enabled them to detrain without the use of lifting gear. The tanks just drove off under their own power. As you see, the ramp wagon lowered part of its floor to form an incline down which the tanks passed one after the other. This saved an enormous amount of time and labor. Careful driving by the tank crews was the real reason for its success. Here's another transport problem which the Southern solved for the government. In the case of this bridge-carrying tank, we made the bridge and fitted it at Eastleigh Works. See how easily it unfolds over that hole in the ground, bridging what might be an awkward gap. Now, over the bridge she goes and on to victory. Simple, isn't it? Now we come to one of the peak moments of the lease-lend period. Railway transport difficulties in England were growing enormous, and to help alleviate the strain on our local shops, the Yanks sent over a number of their own locomotives which had to be prepared for the track on arrival here. This work couldn't be considered strange to our Eastleigh people. A locomotive is a locomotive the world over, they said. But the American tendency to put so many of the works on the outside of the boiler casing was a bit puzzling, even though it looked very impressive that way. However, these engines were successfully got ready for their European war service, and no vital parts were left over. They were intended primarily to restock the French railways after our inevitable invasion. It was already known that the Germans had requisitioned the greater number of French locos for their own use. Damage to what remained was likely to occur as the result of our own pre-invasion bombing. So until D-Day, these American locos served their apprenticeship somewhere in England. Later on, they did a grand job supporting our armies along their long and difficult road to victory. The tide of the war turned, and instead of working under the threat of Nazi invasion, our works people toiled with the hope of our invasion as their spur. And then came one of their most hectic periods. Here are some of them constructing boats, fast motorboats at the Eastleigh shops for coming excitements. Girls and men worked side by side, sharing the same work. All of them deserve this brief pictorial tribute to their skill and industry. To carry our invasion troops onto the French beaches, the southern shops made any number of these flat-bottomed LCPs, landing craft personnel. This construction work was completely new to the workshops people, and although it is more than likely that many of them had often pushed the boat out before, few, if any, attempted to build one. On completion, the LCPs were moved to Southampton, where they took to the water like the proverbial duck. The safety of our troops was the responsibility of the builders of these landing craft, and as it proved, in them no one got the wrong sort of let down in the channel. Another type of invasion craft constructed in the southern shops, harbour launches, used for general purposes and capable of carrying 50 men or stores. These launches were constructed over wooden jigs, which as soon as work was sufficiently forward, were removed to give the workers access to the insides. The first skin was put on in strips, all laid in one direction. The strips were clamped and riveted in place. A second skin was then overlaid, the strips running in the opposite direction so that the strain would be equal and that the body would retain its shape when the jig was removed. This view gives some idea of the finished article. The launch was now ready for fitting and finishing and for all those other processes which make a vessel seaworthy. They brought on the girls to do what was known as driving and clenching boat nails, and at the end of their act, the boys came back to install the engines and perform intricate and delicate feats of wiring and all the other things which made these craft so dependable. Incidentally, these harbour launches were so large it was quite impossible to get them out of the shops in the normal way. and so traversers, usually employed to remove railway coaches from the carriage works to the running track, were called in to handle this special job, in which they proved most effective. Here was something to get steamed up about: keels for assault landing craft. The wood had to be bent into the required shape to form the keels of the vessels, and to effect this easily, it was first steamed and softened. When the wood had become sufficiently amenable to discipline, it was removed from the steamer and laid on the keel blocks, where, with the aid of artfully placed wedges and gentle taps from that most useful tool, the persuader, it began to take shape. The first stage of the construction work was done. Frames of a peculiar shape were fitted to the keel and knocked into position. A few more of these and the craft assumed an odd Noah's Ark appearance, which rather appealed to one's sense of humor. Then came the first layer of the sides, the inner skin. This was of wood cut in sections and measured accurately to fractions of an inch. The wood was afterwards covered by the real thing, the armor plating, which converted Noah's Ark into a war vessel, capable of withstanding any sort of flood. Then the fitting began, a charmingly vague term. By this time, the shop's workpeople had become experienced boat builders, and it is not surprising that among all the craft which they had constructed for the invasion, none was reported to have been a dud. It is only right to give those workers this verbal pat on the back which they so well deserve. There goes an assault landing craft, just one of the many things made in the southern workshops which cannot by any means be allied to normal railway work. Hats off to you, Eastleigh. The second front was now the subject of practically every conversation one overheard. In the Southern's workshops, they didn't just talk about it. There, great preparations for the Allied invasion of Europe were taking place. Here are some of the MLCs, motor lighter craft, in the course of construction. These craft were intended primarily for carrying tanks. Heavy armor plate was a notable feature of these vessels, particularly on the steersman's shelter, the nerve center in which was located the steering gear, radio, and other important gadgets. Day by day, the building of the MLCs progressed noticeably. These craft were very satisfactory things to work on, as they so forcefully suggested the aggressive power quite in keeping with their intended function. One of their more interesting features was the formidable-looking front door, if such a term can be used in connection with such a war machine, a door which could be let down rather like a drawbridge to enable the tanks carried inside the vessel to run out under their own power when the invasion beach was reached. The very size of these MLCs made their removal from their birthplace a matter of careful calculation and even more careful execution. As a point of interest, the doors of this particular shop where the vessel was made had to be specially enlarged to afford a comfortable exit. Meticulous road transport organization was necessary for the conveyance of the motor lighter craft from the shops at Eastleigh to Southampton docks. As these craft were an out-of-gauge load, this journey could not be covered by rail. En route to Southampton, special traffic police cleared the way before them. All other traffic was parked on the roadside to give the MLCs a free and unhindered passage. On arrival at the dock gates, the Southern Railway's Southampton staff took over the job of transferring the craft from the lorries across the quays to the river. Sheerlegs assisted in the launching, the first real test of the workshop people's skill at boat building. Back at Eastleigh, a last look round the boat building section revealed one more important craft which should be mentioned. the LCSM, short for Landing Craft Support Medium. These big boats were designed to cover our invasion troops as they landed from their LCPs, and for this purpose they were made additionally strong. The steel plating which covered them was a great help in that connection. The high elevation of their guns enabled them to engage enemy planes as well as ground targets. There goes a helpful contribution to the invasion fleet, with best wishes from the Eastleigh shops. So far, you've seen only operations carried out by the Southern Railway's employees for the land and seaborne forces. Now, what about the air forces? Well, one of the tasks most successfully accomplished was the manufacture of tail units for aerial torpedoes. These tail units, made up of a multiplicity of little bits of wood, each of the utmost importance to the whole construction, were the things which kept aerial torpedoes on a level keel and straight on their course once they had been launched by their carrier planes. When fitted with one of these tail pieces, the torpedo, instead of nosediving into the sea as would normally be the case, reached the surface of the water in a horizontal position and proceeded towards its target without deflection from the original aim. The advantage lay in the fact that a torpedo thus fitted could be launched accurately from a much greater height than would be the case where the necessity to engage the enemy ship at close range would possibly mean the loss of our plane. The manufacture of these tail pieces involved an enormous number of processes. The cutting of myriad bits of wood, planing, gluing, covering, painting, all with the highest degree of accuracy to ensure the proper balance and performance of the finished article. In all these delicate operations, the skillful, sensitive fingers of a host of women workers proved an enormous asset. They all toiled long hours at their individual jobs with a tireless good cheer that was quite a tonic in its effect. It is impossible, in this short record of the war jobs done in the Southern Railway shops, to outline every process through which these aerial torpedo tail units had to pass before they reached the testing stage. The striking fact is that the work was done by our employees in an entirely satisfactory manner. These tail units were difficult things to make, and in addition to the woodwork of the body, there was the business of fitting cylinders and gyroscopes and goodness knows what else to enable them to fulfill their purpose. Although these pictures reveal that the girls did most of the work on the aerial torpedo tail pieces, it was left to the inspector to examine them and to make a final checkup. There is no record of any complaint from him regarding faulty workmanship. Break for workers' playtime. Here's Fanny, special envoy from ENSA, putting over a hot one while she absent-mindedly tears that newspaper into daily doilies for the canteen trays. One advantage of schizophrenia anyway. The audience warms up to appreciative temperature, and thus encouraged, Mabel makes short work of any doubt about her ability to knock up a tune on the what's-it. Lunchtime over, and back to the grim work of preparing for the invasion once more. In this shop, they made pontoons. Actually, these were the center sections of pontoon bridges across which were to be laid roads to facilitate the passage of our troops with their tanks and heavy vehicles. Naturally, the Jerrys would destroy as many bridges and create as many barriers as possible to stem the advance of our armies during the invasion period. And these pontoons would then be of major importance in maintaining road communications. Enormous strides in the manufacture and use of laminated plywood during the war made short work of a number of constructional problems. Strength with lightness and resilience was a feature of this new medium, and it was employed with the greatest effect. New workshops creations were born almost hourly, and all the time the one thought, invasion, was the incentive to the greatest effort. When all the bolting, gluing and painting was done, each finished pontoon had to be tested. As it was intended to uphold the weight of heavy tanks, it was necessary to ensure that it could do this. So it was immersed in a special testing tank capable of exerting a total pressure of 6 tons on the submerged pontoon. And if it got through that severe medical, it was passed OK for the Army. This was an unusual job, the weighing of small test pieces from each lot of timber in stock to check their moisture content before the wood could be passed as fit in the manufacture of tail units for the famous Horsa gliders. Once okayed, each little piece of wood was stamped and numbered to assist the people on the workshop benches in their intricate job of fitting them into the jigsaw, the successful completion of which was of the greatest importance to our chances of success in the coming invasion. Gradually, the components were built up into recognizable shapes, which were stacked ready to meet the continual demands from the assembly line. Plywood, limp as linoleum and strong as you like, and incidentally very costly, was used in skinning the frames of the gliders. This job had to be done with meticulous care and secrecy, and the Eastleigh Shops workers, by this time quite used to secrets, knew how to keep mum. This is how the carriage shops looked when the building of the glider tail units was the top priority job. It's rather difficult to reconcile these scenes of tranquil efficiency with the rattle and roar of total war, the ultimate destiny of every one of the tail units made here. The meticulous care taken in the manufacture of the tail units has already been mentioned. And here is one of these interesting gadgets which was used to detect and register the presence of any moisture in the joints of the frames before they were skinned. Once the work of skinning the tailplanes was begun, the frames looked more like something to do with aircraft. Rather a far cry from those sleek, comfortable coaches in which we used to travel, and which would normally occupy the floor space in this shop during their building period. When putting in the spars of the tailplanes, the girls thought out a Stakhanovite method of attacking the job. As you see, they stood on opposite sides of the frame, and as one hammered, the other blocked the knock, so to speak. Then they swapped tools so that the alternate nailing could progress rapidly. In the days when we knew something about aircraft recognition, we might have recognized this as a rudder in course of manufacture. These rudders were fabricated in exactly the same way. The framework was overlaid with a special ply and was afterwards covered with fabric. You can see this rudder shaping already. The extremely pliable skin was tailored to fit exactly. Notice how those points on the scallops meet the ribs in just the right place. The leather tapes held everything together while minute adjustments were made and all the screwing and gluing was completed. These spars were included in the structure to give it extra strength. So far, so good. These completed skeletons can now wait for the next process while we take a look at the fins. The extremely opportune invention of the plywood used in these skinning processes on the tail unit components proved an absolute boon to the Southern Railway Workshops people. They handled so much of it during this period. It was extremely versatile in use, easy to deal with, and of great strength, just the thing for the job in hand. Now this was the really satisfying stage of the construction of the tail units. Fin, rudder and tailplane were given a trial assembly. They called it a mock-up. The assembly was thoroughly examined and any faults of construction and performance were adjusted before each individual part was finally covered with protective fabric. When everyone concerned was quite satisfied that everything was as it should be, the mock-up was dismantled again, and each component of the tail unit was taken back to its shop for the spraying treatment. Housewives who spent their coupons on surplus government fabrics did well. Here is some of it undergoing a strict examination before use on the gliders. When this fabric was okayed, the glider components were covered with it. This stitchcraft might be a little different from petit point or crewel work, but these girls certainly did sew a fine seam. A protective covering of dope was applied to the fabric to help the finished glider to withstand the effects of weather. After this, the seams were taped. The girls on this job soon developed an interesting technique known among themselves as passing the buck. The tapes, once applied and fixed in position over the seams, were then covered with another coat of protective dope, and when dry, the tailplane was ready for the finishing touches. The construction of these Horsa glider tail units in the Southern's workshops was one of those top secret jobs which the everyday man and woman on the benches took as a matter of course. Most of them must have been fully aware of what was happening, but their still tongues indicated their wise heads. The general secrecy which surrounded their work was maintained to the last. Few people before have had this peep behind the scenes in the Southern Railway workshops, and those people who did so much to help maintain the lines behind the lines during those 6 long and weary years of war. Their reward came with the invasion, that crowning onslaught to which their efforts had contributed enormously. This film, which has concentrated on their grim and colourless tasks, now makes a long overdue acknowledgement.